I'm working with Magic Mind, if you want to try one.
Ooh.
You are my third of the day, and I need a little focus and energy.
Amazing. Cheers.
Cheers. I try and chug it. It tastes really good. Liz Tenuto, welcome to Pretty Smart. I am so excited to have you here because I have been following you for over a year and your work has been so impactful for me. Liz, where did the name Workout Witch come from?
I used to teach one-on-one lessons in person, and I did it for about 14 years. And when my clients came to me, often they had some sort of injury, frozen shoulder, lower back pain that wasn't going away. They were coming out of a surgery, and I was helping them with injury recovery. Normally, they had already been to a physical therapist. They had already done kind of traditional methods of healing, but nothing really worked for them. And they came to me and we would do Pilates and a bunch of other types of somatic exercises together. And they laughed and would call me a witch all the time. You're like this witch that like we had to find through the depths of the healing world. And we came in and, you know, finally feel better and our injury is finally healing in a long-term sustainable way. And so people used to joke with me that I was a witch, and one client specifically called me the Workout Witch, and I just loved the name so much that it stuck, and I decided to name my business that.
I love that you said long-term stress, because that's one of the things that really stuck out to me about your work.
So I grew up around a lot of rage, and within my extended family, my therapist calls it I was surrounded with next level violence. And I started experiencing chronic pain really young. I was about 14 when it began flaring up. And I also had really bad insomnia at that age. I was a dancer at the time, so I had a place to kind of channel my emotions and express myself, which was really helpful. And I also kind of thought that my chronic pain was from dance because it just makes sense. I was doing ballet and contemporary dance, and that made sense to me. So I stopped dancing for a little while, and my chronic pain and my insomnia got worse. By the time I was in my 20s, I got hyperthyroid, which is really young to get that. And I started going on this big healing quest. And I tried a lot of different things, doctors, specialists, chiropractors, holistic healing modalities, and nothing was really sticking for me. Finally, my ballet teacher at the time mentioned, she was like, something's up with you, like something's wrong, because she saw that I was having difficulty orienting in space. And she saw that I was dissociating all the time. And I was a pretty good dancer. So those things, those characteristics for a dancer to not know where you are in space are kind of rare. And she was like, something's wrong. I want you to come to my somatics class. And I was really skeptical at first, honestly, because I had seen her class before. It was just a bunch of people in pajamas laying on the floor doing these tiny movements. And I was like, how is this going to help me? You know, like it didn't make logical sense to me, but I was also open and slightly desperate to find something that would work. And after 4 lessons, my chronic pain was almost gone and I was sleeping really well for the first time in 10 years.
But I was surprised to learn that your work started because you were dealing with chronic pain and healing yourself. What exactly is somatics?
Soma is the Greek word for body. And somatic exercises are literally really gentle movements that you can do on your bed or on the floor that release the years or decades of pent-up stress, stored trauma out of your body. They also regulate your nervous system. They build new neural pathways so that you can get out of living in survival mode and get back into your homeostasis.
Okay, you were talking about how there's different modalities of somatic.
Yeah, you want me to pick up there?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
There are different schools of somatics, and the work that my teacher did is called Feldenkrais.
Okay, and I read that you were a narcissistic abuse survivor. Was that early on in your family, or was that later in life?
I had two major phases of experiencing that in my life. I grew up around a parent that is narcissistic. And then I also, unfortunately, married, without my knowledge, married a narcissist and didn't really discover that until about a year into the marriage. Because initially, when you're dating a narcissist, they love bomb you and they treat you really, really well. And that was my experience. He was like a dream for me at first. And then shortly after getting married, things started to change. And about a year into the marriage, I felt like something was deeply wrong. And I felt like it was very similar to what I had experienced as a child.
It's interesting that you put those two together. Most people never make that link.
Yeah. The patterns of behavior were really similar and it felt really familiar. And I was also noticing that I was having chronic pain flare-ups and I was having the insomnia come back again. And so my body kind of gave me all of these warning signs. And because I had already been trained in somatics, I was very tuned into that and was very good at listening to that. So I have had two major healing phases in my own life, one from childhood and then the second one from my marriage in my mid-30s.
So I had like a back issue several years ago, and it lasted for about 8 months. And I was trying so many different things, and I love to work out, and so I felt just really stunted by it.
Yeah.
And then I went to lunch with a friend who's a very thoughtful, smart guy. And he was like, "How are you?" I said, I'm great, but my back is killing me. And he's like, "How long has it been?" And I said, "It's about 8 months." And he was like, "That's not back pain." I said, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "If you hurt your back, it heals in 3 months usually."
Yes.
That's emotional pain.
Right.
And I was going through a really hard time, and I did not put the two together. What are some of the signs that stress is showing up in your body and it's not something like you pushed a moving box or stretched the wrong way?
Your friend was exactly right in the timeline for pain. If it's over 3 months, that's an indication of long-term pain, and that's normally not from a fall, from sleeping incorrectly, from, picking up a box. It's normally emotional. Other signs that you have a lot of stress stored in your body are waking up with a puffy face, feeling constantly bloated, feeling exhausted all the time, anxiety that keeps getting worse and worse, startling really easily, having issues with sleep. So maybe you can't fall asleep or you wake up multiple times in the middle of the night, or you're kind of staying up really late and like scrolling because it's your only time to really be unstressed. That's quite common for people.
It's interesting.
Especially recently since the pandemic. Chest pains, muscle tension, like if you're clenching your jaw right now, clenching the sphincter right now, raised shoulders are also a sign of, so you can almost even look at someone and kind of see if they're feeling stressed right now or not.
How do you think that we differentiate between pain, injury, and trauma? Because all the signs and all the symptoms that you just shared are also just things that we dabble in. Like I sometimes stay up late scrolling, and it's not right. Like, how do we know? And that's probably the question you get the most.
Yeah. If you're doing it once in a while, every here and there, it's really not anything to be concerned about.
Yeah.
It's when you start doing it as a routine and it becomes a pattern for you, or it becomes like staying up late scrolling becomes like your like little safe place and you can't wait to do it and you've been doing it for months. 3 months is really kind of the amount of time within somatics, within physical therapy, even within some schools of psychology that you start to think like, okay, this is maybe a problem.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's really about that long-term pattern that you're doing, not just once in a while.
I originally found your work because I was at Canyon Ranch and I did a stretch class for my hips. And the teacher said, you may cry later, like it's a place that holds a lot of emotion. And I was like, I'm good. I'm actually in a place where I'm kind of happy right now.
Yes.
I've been through lows. I'm not there. And like 5 hours later, I was crying.
Oh, yeah.
And I was looking online, like, what is this about? And that's how I found your work. What do our hips hold?
Yes. There are different emotions that are stored in different parts of your body. The hips specifically hold old trauma, unresolved trauma, suppressed emotions, betrayal. And a lot of, like, for a lot of women, it's relationship trauma too. And specifically, you have a muscle called the psoas muscle. It's spelled PSOAS.
Yeah.
And it connects your upper body to your lower body. It's a very deep muscle. And that muscle is the first muscle that contracts in your fight-flight response. It's like your first responder. And primitively, it was intended to contract to get us out of the situation, right? So a bear is attacking us, that muscle kicks in, and you're able to get out, or you're able to fight. It's a very powerful muscle. Now in modern society, that muscle contracts from not a bear, but just like from your boss yelling at you or having a really bad fight with your partner. And the interesting thing about that muscle specifically is it stays contracted until you manually release it. So and that is often the cause for long-term lower back pain. So a lot of people have this contracted psoas, and they'll start to notice like, oh, my hips hurt, my back hurts, I'm sitting like this, I'm not breathing the same as I used to. And they'll start to notice these symptoms, but they don't understand why or what's happening. And that's really my mission, is to help people know what those symptoms mean so that they can actually address what's going on for them.
Yeah. Can you talk more about flight, fight, or freeze? Specifically freeze, because I think that's where we're living mostly as women in 2024.
Yeah. So freeze has a spectrum. There's functional freeze, and then shutdown. Functional freeze, I think, is where a lot of women are living right now. Functional freeze is a response to long-term stress or unresolved trauma. Essentially, within the nervous system, you have fight, flight, and freeze. Freeze is a little bit further down on the severity scale than fight or flight. So if you've been in fight or flight for a long time, what happens is you start to get exhausted. You can't really live like that long term. And then you start to go into freeze. Freeze can also happen suddenly in a really traumatic event. So if you're in a really violent event, or you're experiencing SA, that often happens and you just freeze because you don't feel like you have any other option and you can't really escape or do anything. Functional freeze specifically is when you can get through your day. You can even be like great at your career. You can be great at managing your family. You look really together, but then you get home and you just absolutely crash, like on the couch for 5 hours, too exhausted to make or even order food, maybe too exhausted to even brush your teeth at night, just so tired. And then you get up the next day and you do it over again. And so it's almost like you're living these two lives in functional freeze, where publicly you seem one way, but then personally at home, you're overwhelmed, stuck, exhausted, and you don't really know what to do about it. And most people don't know what it is. Most people think they're depressed when they're in functional freeze, but it's physiological. It's a nervous system thing. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It's actually your nervous system trying to protect you from experiencing more trauma or more stress. It's conserving your energy.
So when you go to treat somebody, what does that process look like? Like, say I come to you and I'm in functional freeze.
Yeah. First, I just take an assessment of their movement, actually, because it gives me a lot of information that maybe they're not going to be willing to share with me verbally yet. So I look at how someone's standing, I look at how someone is sitting, and I have them stand and sit for me. I talk about what brought them in, and then I ask a few questions, like, what did you do over the weekend is often really a good indicator, you know, and if someone's like, oh, I was so exhausted and I canceled my plans with my friends and I just stayed in pajamas and I rested, then for me, I'm like, okay, let's keep asking more questions. Let's keep asking. It's okay. It's okay. And we all do
all
it.
The producers here are looking at me.
Well, we all do it sometimes, right? Yeah. But it's when it becomes, you know, I lived in functional freeze for years during my marriage. And it's like, it becomes a problem when you've been doing it for 4 months, 6 months, 2 years. Like, you're actually not really living your life anymore. You're just in survival mode, getting by. And your body is really taxed.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think that they just need to rest, which is a great first step to healing, but you actually need to also regulate your nervous system and go through a recovery process to get better.
So what release will somebody feel when something's been laying dormant for a while?
Yeah. Initially, as you're doing somatic exercises, you'll start to yawn a lot as you're doing the exercises. Your stomach will start to rumble a lot. And those are actually great signs that your nervous system is starting to come back to its homeostasis. So you're not in fight, flight, or freeze anymore. Those are physiological indicators.
Really?
Yeah.
If your stomach is grumbling?
Yeah, while you're doing the exercises.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, so what you really don't want to just jump into a trauma release without preparing your body at all. You can, but it's a little bit overwhelming. It's a little bit intense, especially if someone's in freeze. It can be like too much for them. So I really guide people through a process. That's why I do it over 30 days to get their body prepared and get their body back to homeostasis first before we release. So you're already feeling safe in your body. You're already feeling connected to yourself. Your nervous system is already regulating. You're getting out of fight, flight, freeze first. And then we do the release after that. The release itself is generally 1 minute to 5 minutes. Some of my students have told me that they've cried for 15 minutes, for 30 minutes before. It's a really good, deep, cleansing cry. Sometimes you don't know why you're crying, but just let it out. And after that release, you might also experience some shaking in your body as you're doing the exercise, the release exercises. A little shaking. Some people laugh and cry at the same time, which can be a little disorienting for them too. After you experience the release, you'll feel much lighter physically and emotionally. You'll literally feel like you've just let a huge weight off of your chest, off of your shoulders, out of your stomach. It feels great. And you'll feel much more energized as well.
Wow. I read The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
And that was obviously like a groundbreaking book on this topic.
Yeah.
And it says trauma results in a fundamental reorganization, the way the mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think, but also our very capacity to think. How do you think the mind and the body work together when it comes to trauma?
Your nervous system is the communication between your mind and your body. So it's literally like the communication highway. So your nervous system actually touches like every part of your body, including your brain. Traditionally, we've really looked at trauma as mental, and it's even been controversial, you know, to say that it impacts your body. And people think of it as woo-woo. And I did too when I first started. I didn't really understand that it also impacts your body.
So when you say trauma, because I think people think SA or something really intense, but trauma can be like a bad breakup.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Dr. Gabor Mate has this really beautiful way of defining trauma, which I'll paraphrase. And it's, trauma isn't what happened to you, it's like the injury of what happened to you. So if you go through a really bad breakup and it rocks your world and it devastates you and you can't get out of bed for multiple months, and you feel like it's trauma, you know, like maybe there was betrayal in that relationship. Maybe you had a whole future built about that relationship. You're the person that gets to decide what trauma is and what it isn't for you, not anyone else.
Yeah. What parts of the brain are involved in trauma?
The amygdala, which is the fear response center, often gets for folks with PTSD and CPTSD, the amygdala gets much larger. Your prefrontal cortex as well, which is this part just like right at your forehead.
That's the decision making?
Decision making, it's kind of like, if you were to think about your brain, it would be like the C-suite of your brain where all of your like decision making, logic. So as your fear gets larger, this ability to have rational thinking, to make decisions, to plan for your life gets impacted, and it becomes much harder. And it's harder to pay attention. You have brain fog. So many people now think they have ADHD, and ADHD is very valid. But there's a huge overlap between ADHD symptoms and nervous system dysregulation from trauma and also CPTSD. There's so many symptoms that overlap. So if you're experiencing brain fog, difficulty with decision making, but it hasn't always been a thing for you, like as a kid you didn't experience that, it's probably from nervous system dysregulation or trauma. You definitely want to get checked out and just see and really assess what the situation is.
What are the key areas of the body where trauma gets stored?
Yeah. Hips is so key because that's where your psoas muscle is, and that is one of the first places to respond to any fight-flight instinct. Your jaw is also a place that responds to fight-flight. So these two are the first responders. If you have a tense jaw, and if your teeth are clenched, even right now, you probably also have a tight psoas muscle. Folks will experience, if they have a tight jaw, they'll experience headaches, they'll experience neck tension, they'll experience shoulder tension. Jaw has a lot to do with anger and resentment. Hips are more betrayal, childhood trauma. And those are patterns, they're not absolutes. Folks can also store trauma in their shoulders, and this is often connected to anxiety or long-term stress. You literally feel like you have so much burden on your shoulders. And the neck is also a big place for people. And the neck is really connected to oppression, losing your voice, not feeling like you can speak up for yourself. So folks with people-pleasing patterns often have neck pain as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I think there's a significant amount of people that have buried trauma and don't remember it.
Yeah.
How can people access it in their bodies if they don't remember?
The amazing thing about somatic therapy, somatic exercises, is that it's bottom up, meaning that you start with the body rather than starting with the mind. So you don't actually have to remember what happened to you. You can just notice that you have the symptoms of trauma. So maybe you have issues with sleep, you have chest pains, you have frequent stomach aches, more than 3 times per month, frequent headaches, muscle tension. All of these are indications that you may be storing trauma in your body, and you can start to do somatic therapy or somatic exercises to heal. And the amazing thing about these exercises or this type of therapy is that you're really moving your body and releasing this tension. And as you do, you're building new neural pathways in your nervous system out of the habitual stress response, the habitual fight-flight response, those neural pathways can get really strong for people, and back into your homeostasis. So people will say oh my gosh, I feel like myself again. Or I can see myself again in the mirror. I met myself again for the first time after I feel like I've been hiding for years after they do somatics. Sometimes when you do somatics or somatic therapy, you can have dreams, memories, even nightmares about some trauma that's happened to you, which I'm really clear with people in the course. There's a whole thing about that can happen. And sometimes that can be scary for people, right? Because it's something that they've buried for a long time. And when you bury it, it's not because you don't want to see it, it's because it's too overwhelming for you in that moment to process it. So the good thing about that stuff coming up is it's an indication that you're starting to feel safe again. because as you start to feel safer, that stuff can come up and you can actually address it. And addressing it is what heals it. And it is what ultimately liberates you and sets you free. Keeping it buried won't. So even if you are having nightmares because you started working with a somatic therapist, like, it's totally scary in that moment. It's good to acknowledge that. And that's why it's good to work with someone like a somatic therapist, or we do a ton of support for all of our students. We have a whole team of people that have a somatic background that are trained and can help people through these things. We make sure to provide resources and personal support for all of our students. But you do want to make sure that you're doing it with some level of support, so you're not just like on an island trying to process this by yourself from like a YouTube video.
What do you think the worst habits are that come along with stress and trauma that make the experience even worse? I've heard you talk about revenge sleep procrastination.
Yes.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Revenge sleep procrastination is when you stay up really late at night, kind of mindlessly scrolling on your phone, and you're exhausted, but it's like 1 a.m. and you're also having a great time scrolling on your phone. So you just stay up for another hour or two. And this often happens for people when they've been masking all day, or they're not able to be their authentic self all day. And at a certain point, you need to be authentic, right? You need to like look at what you love to look at and go down different rabbit holes and enjoy yourself. And so a lot of people will do that really late at night. Very common for new moms, actually, because they have so much responsibility and they're so busy and they're taking care of everyone and they don't really get any time to themselves. So these like really late hours for them are sacred.
Wow.
Yeah. But ultimately, if you're doing it long term, it's going to cause a bunch of other problems.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are simple movements that we can all do to deal with sadness and fear?
Absolutely. You want me to describe one?
Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite movement to start with is you lay on your bed, on your stomach. You bring your hands up and stack your hands on top of each other. Place your forehead on top of your hands, and you just gently rock your hips side to side in the laziest, least ambitious way possible, just like you're on day 4 of a vacation.
So many of the women that listen are just very ambitious, so I think this is a good call out.
Yes, like how unmotivated can you be as you do this movement? And it's just, you're just gonna rock back and forth for about a minute. You want to keep the movement small, relaxed, heavy, not trying at all.
Yeah.
And you don't need to set a timer, because that's going to like, whatever you think a minute is great. And then you'll notice the rocking has this really beautiful even rhythm that starts to regulate your nervous system. And this exercise also utilizes bilateral stimulation, which regulates your nervous system too. So it's a great exercise if you're feeling really stressed, if you're feeling too stressed to sleep, or if you're feeling really anxious. It's a really nice movement to do that's really simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about lowering your cortisol naturally. This is going to sound really silly, but can we go back to the basics? Like, what is our cortisol?
Yeah.
Like, what are our cortisol levels?
Absolutely. So when you experience fear, your amygdala gets larger. That goes down into your pituitary gland, which connects to your adrenals. Your adrenals are what create cortisol. It's what creates your stress hormone. This happens in like 74 milliseconds. It's super fast. So you experience fear, boom, cortisol spike. The cortisol spike is really happening to help you get out of whatever situation is causing the stress. So it's in that moment, it's trying to help you flee or fight.
And can this be as small as social anxiety or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I think what's really interesting about our nervous system is it's like this ancient primitive system that hasn't yet caught up with modern society. So people will experience a cortisol spike when they're sending an email. They'll experience a cortisol spike like I experience cortisol spikes when I'm in large crowds because that's part of my history that makes me really scared. So it's also about kind of honoring historically what has your story and kind of what still triggers you and knowing that and it's okay, just knowing that like, ooh, I feel my heart racing right now, or I feel I'm suddenly sweating, or you're breathing really fast. Those are pretty clear indications of a cortisol spike. And your cortisol will spike and then you'll feel all these physiological sensations, like I just mentioned. Totally fine if it happens once in a while, but a lot of people are experiencing cortisol spikes multiple times a day, every day, or multiple times a week, every week. Mm-hmm. They experience a cortisol spike every time they see their boss, or they, or they experience a cortisol spike for a long time because they're in a fight with their partner. So like every interaction that they have is this really stressful thing. And that's okay. We just need the tools to manage that and the awareness to know what's going on, because we're not taught any of this. We don't know any of this. This took me like 10 years of trying to figure out what was going on until I discovered somatics. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, why am I so scared getting onto the subway?
Yeah.
Like I felt like it was like a life or death situation.
Well, I think it's so interesting too, because you're such a brave person. So it must have been really hard to think like, why can't I do this seemingly simple task?
Yeah. And also, why is this bothering me, but it's not bothering any of my friends? It's not bothering anyone else on the train.
Yeah.
I would like break out in sweat when I would get on the subway, and I didn't understand what the reason for that was.
You were 4 sessions away from healing.
Yes.
You didn't know at the time.
I had no idea.
Well, I think one of the reasons I was really excited to have you here is I had just learned about somatics in the last year, and I'm like into the world of healing. I'm curious about it. I'm interested. And I think people are just now talking about it in a more mainstream way.
Yeah.
What do you think that is? Why is it having its moment?
Yes, I think when the pandemic hit, a lot of us came online more. And we started to learn a lot of new information, specifically about trauma, because we collectively went through a trauma, right? So we're specifically learning a lot more about trauma. We're specifically learning a lot more about healing. And a lot of people started therapy during the pandemic too. And I really think that influx of information is why somatics is having its moment. It's been around since like 1972. That was the first time Thomas Hanna used the word somatics, and it has had, several schools have had development, and there's somatic experiencing with Dr. Peter Levine that's quite popular, and it has been around for, I believe, about 20 years, but now it's having this huge moment because we're all so much more aware of trauma, of that maybe we're all living in chronic stress in the United States, or so many of us are. Like you go to Europe and you're like, why do I feel so different? Our culture,
partly because we're on vacation.
Partly because we're on vacation, but our culture also has a different pace.
I do a little rapid fire at the end of any interview. What is a song that's currently on repeat in your life?
Ooh, Dua Lipa, Dance the Night Away.
A wellness trend that you think is worth the hype?
Infrared saunas.
Wellness trend that's completely skippable?
Cold plunges.
I agree. Oh my God. And can you say more about that? Because it's cortisol related.
Yeah, absolutely. A cold plunge isn't ideal or even beneficial for you if you're living with long-term stress. It's because your body is already in its fight-flight response. And so when you submerge into an icy bath of cold water, your body thinks that you're like falling, it thinks that you're in a life or death situation. The reason why you feel really good when you get out is because your body thinks that you just survived falling into a frozen lake.
You escaped death.
You escaped death, and that's why you feel so good. But if you're already stressed and you're cold plunging, you're just keeping yourself in that state of fight or flight. You're actually exacerbating it, and you're just continuously living in this physiological survival mode.
What is a book that has changed your life, something you think everybody should read?
Glennon Doyle, Untamed.
Why?
If you've read the book, you'll know this. You're a goddamn cheetah.
Do you have a hidden talent?
I love line dancing.
What?
Yeah.
That is amazing. Where are you from?
I'm from San Diego originally.
So how in the hell did you learn how to line dance?
When I moved to LA, I started going to queer line dancing. And it's super fun. It's on Monday and Thursday nights.
Are they playing Beyonce now?
They are playing Beyonce now.
I feel like that's the new line dance.
Now it's like super cool to line dance.
Fabulous.
Because of Beyonce.
You are ahead of the trend.
Yeah, only slightly, but yeah.
Will you grab the question everything card game?
Yes.
And then pick whichever card calls you.
Okay. What's something you wish people could see about you that they don't see at first glance? I think for me, it's that I've been through a lot and have been at a really deep rock bottom place.
Mm-hmm.
When I got out of my marriage, it was an abusive marriage, and I had to leave like really quickly. And, there was also financial abuse that he had done to me involved, and I didn't have a home to go to because I left, and was just so deeply struggling. It was the worst time of my life, and I really understand what rock bottom is from a personal level. And I don't think that people think that when they first meet me or first see my videos, because I've done a lot of work to heal from it.
I think one of the things that's really inspiring is if somebody's at rock bottom, they can see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really tough.
Yeah. It's really hard.
When you were in it, did you think you would get out of it?
It was like I didn't even have the mental bandwidth to think about whether I was going to get out of it or not. I just knew I needed to leave that situation. Like I needed to leave it like yesterday. Yeah. There was an incident that happened that was just so far past my boundaries, and that night I left. I felt just the whole world was spinning. I had no idea where I was going to go. I had enough money for like 2 meals.
Liz, for real?
Yeah.
What'd you do?
I called my brother, and he unfortunately was on a trip in nature with no cell service.
Yeah.
Luckily, he called me the next day, but I slept in my car for a night, and then he called me, and I got a restraining order and did some legal setup. And he had my back every step of the way. And that is why I ended up moving to the Bay Area for a little while, is because that's where he lives, in San Francisco. So he helped me get through that phase a lot, and I'm really grateful. And my aunt and my uncle and my cousins helped me through that phase too. So I'm really glad I had that family support, but some people don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the smartest decision you've ever made?
Trusting my gut over and over and over again, even when people were telling me that what I was feeling was wrong.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.